Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the live stream. My name is Matt Bailey. I'm the National Ambassador for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. Really appreciate you tuning in and coming along this ride with me when I do live streams, when we get to learn about fantastic things to do with whiskey, the whole journey as it goes. I've thrown up an image of some, I keep pointing the wrong way. It's right there on your screen, an image of some grain, if you like. And that's what the theme of tonight is, to talk a little bit about grain whiskey, about grain distillation, about column stills, coffee stills, whatever you want to call them. And we're going to talk about one of the releases coming up in Outturn, which is G10.28 Pudding Faceplant. This is, of course, a release in our March Game Changers Outturn. There it is. And that's out this Friday. Really exciting Outturn for this Friday. Taking off on Friday, the 5th of March at midday. So if you're watching this a little bit later on, of course, you can tune in, of course, and watch this at your own discretion, or you can watch us along with us now live. Evening from Adelaide says, Ed N, good to see you and hope you're well. And always great to see members tuning in and jumping in on the comments. And I'm going to talk and feature this whiskey. But first, what I'm going to do, I always like to do this. I'm going to open it. You get to see me opening it live on stream here. I have not opened this before. I'm not going to lose the flavor cap this time. Good sound, good sound. And I'm just going to pour about 20, 30 mils of that, just enough to have a taste. And I'm going to pop that over there and just let this breathe for a moment. I do believe in letting whiskey breathe in the glass for a little bit. James Finnegan, hope you're well. Good to see you, mate. And hope you're resting up and getting back to your usual state. I see you've been going working on your knee a bit there, it looks like. And I can't imagine what that would be like. That'd be tough. That'd be tough. Mobility is one of those things that we often take for granted until we don't have it, I guess. Pudding Faceplant G10.28 is the cask for this evening to talk about, to discuss, to delve a bit deeper into. You know, I people often make fun of referencing color on these live streams, but there is a certain lovely sort of golden, almost like reddish tinge to the glass tonight, and I don't know what that is. It's not really reddish, almost like a pinkish kind of tinge to it. Could be the cask treatment. Let's talk a little bit about that in a moment. Hi team, Darren, good to see you, mate. Hope you're well. Thanks for tuning in. A lot of people jumping in now. If you've just joined the stream, it's live with the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. We're talking about grain whiskey. We're talking about cask G10.28, which I've got here on the desk, which I've just cracked open. And I've just poured a glass to let open up and breathe for a little bit whilst we talk a little bit about this kind of stuff. The photo there is grain. However, what we're going to do is we're going to go over to here's some pot stills. Now, that's at Lag Distillery in Arran. However, these are pot stills. These are not column stills. That's the first main differential I'm going to make for this evening. That is, when we talk on these live streams about single malt and single cask whiskey, we're often talking about whiskey made out of those kind of pot stills right there. Whiskey that is in traditional pot stills, double distilled most of the time. Sometimes, 2.81 times distilled or 3 times distilled, but usually twice distilled pot still distillation, which makes lovely malt whiskey. However, they do produce, out of different types of stills, we often see things that look a little bit closer to this. I'm going to just zoom in on that so we can all see it properly. I've been having some tech issues lately, so bear with me. That is your traditional sort of looking column still or coffee still. By the way, when I say coffee, we're not referring to coffee, the beverage. We're talking about, that's a reference to Anais Coffey, the Irishman who invented continuous grain distillation, invented the still, and there's been obviously so many variations over the years of that style of still. However, we're talking about that style of still, the coffee still. I'm going to call it the column still just for sake of ease. For ease, I'm going to call it the column still. And the column still is, of course, continuous distillation. And I want to talk a bit about that as we go along. Now, there's a very generic looking one. I did, however, manage to sneak a photo at Loch Lomond Distillery, where they have their own continuous distillation, which they would call ROS-DO. We've seen those codes before, G15s. I think there's some more G15 coming through the pipeline soon, actually. We'll have to check with our cellar master on that one. And there's another photo of it. I can't fully give you an indication of how big these things are. They are truly massive, almost behemoths doesn't even do it justice. I mean, I'm just going to zoom in a bit there. It really just keeps going down and down and down into the ground there. I was on the sort of the third level. It doesn't look like much. That's the thing about, that's one of the reasons why I think that people don't think they're very sexy, because they don't look like much. Let's be honest. They kind of just look like, you know, machinery working, and that's what it is. But you also understand that's what pot stills are as well. I'm going to grab a couple of comments here. They produce single grain whiskey in Ireland, Society Bottling. James, we're seeing some Irish gins through from new distilleries, which we've already had, and I think they've already sold out. The Nettle Smooch was an Irish gin. We are going to get some probably other interesting Irish whiskies in the future, so keep an eye out for those. I really need to learn how to use social media. Anyway, here and keen for this one. Justin, you're always welcome here, and you can tune in. As you can see, he's commented here on social media, but you can also comment on our YouTube channel, which I'm going to encourage you all to please check out our YouTube channel. We have some great content on there. We have some exclusive content coming up on there as well. Lots of good stuff going on. Darren says G4.18 we grabbed is an absolute blinder whiskey. Definitely trying to grab one of these. Yeah, this is just something really exciting in our March Outturn. We don't see that many grain whiskies, and I'm here to tell you that they are as complex and as interesting as malt whiskey in their own right. That's if there's anything to take away from tonight, it's understanding that they are grain whiskey is just as interesting in its own right to malt whiskey. I can't stress that enough, and that's really important. So we're just going to grab a few more images. Here is Distillery G10. Not much to look at. Not much to look at. It is the Strathclyde Distillery. I will say the distillery name tonight. It doesn't make much sense. It's the Strathclyde Distillery. It's located pretty much right in the middle of Glasgow. It's been there since 1927. It was founded in 1927 to supply for gin at the time. There was a bit of a gin boom in 1927 in Scotland, obviously. I don't know. There was a gin boom. It was built to supply gins. There was a whole lot of sort of hullabaloo at the time about this other distillery, Port Dundas. It was taking up all this space on the top of a hill, and no one really took much attention about this distillery. They keep them very quiet from the public. They are often a bit noisy. They do emit a lot of smells, and all you have to do is look at some of the Google reviews of this distillery, and it's all locals hating the smell. Some people saying they love the smell because it just smells like bread, which would make sense. They're distilling grain. But anyway, let's talk a bit more about grain whiskey. It's continuous distillation. So pot stills are also, there's a process for each pot still. There has to be the wash, the wash still, then the spirit still, and it goes in batches of number of liters, and then they fill a few casks each day. In continuous distillation, there's some distilleries out there, like even Maker's Mark, that can fill 800 barrels a day. Put that into perspective for a second. 800 barrels a day for some continuous distillation. So basically, a controlled amount of wash goes into the middle, usually around the middle of the still, and fermented wash goes through, and it comes out the other side. That's a really, really basic method of it. They're straight columns, as you can see in the photo here. I'm just going to bring up that photo so we can all see it a bit better. Oh, never works when I want it to. Oh, there we go. So I'll bring up that photo, and you can see here, that's the sort of the continuous aspect of it. They're straight columns, and in most cases, they don't have any sort of bulbous pot design around it, like you see in typical sort of batch distillation systems. However, they're the most common distillate around America, around the world, around Canada. However, it's what we can't see in this photo, the series of plates or trays, and it's the substance that has to be diluted. It's a feedstock that goes into it and is fed into the column roughly at the halfway point, as I said before. So it flows down the trays just due to gravity. However, coming up from the bottom is a blast of steam. When that steam comes into contact with the feedstock, it volatilizes the ethanol and flavor components. As a result, these vapors begin traveling back up through the plates. So it keeps going like that. Basically, it's each tray as it goes down is slightly cooler than the one beneath it, and it causes that condensation of the vapors on each tray. Now, those hot vapors are constantly coming through the system on these stills, and then those are condensed vapors that are redistilled and thrown back into the vapor state. Basically, over and over again, it can be distilled that way, and as a result, it can often spit out at as high as like 96, 97% alcohol. So when you see those vodkas on the market that are 4, 5 times distilled, ultra pure, it just means they've been through a column still a few times. It's taken out, it's stripped out a lot of the flavor, but it also has made is made for a very clean spirit. Now, let me grab some of these comments before I press on too much. G4.19 waiting to open with the boys one day. Looking forward to it. Tim, I hope I'm there when you do it. I hope it's a proper hashtag Outturn Gang afternoon. That'd be great. We could open G4.19. You know what? You overlook grains at your peril. Honestly, you overlook grains at your peril. You'll miss out on some of the most delightfully sublime moments in distillation there. Redbreast and Teeling single grain is a great example of unmalted whiskey. Irish traditionally has a long history with the style. Is there reason it hasn't caught on as much in Scotland's malt whiskey zeitgeist? Oh, that's a very good question. I can't see who's asked that question, but I really like that question. Is the reason why it hasn't caught on as much? Well, that's the thing. I think that's a bit unfair because it actually has. It was just that the society's been innovating in grain for a long time, as well as a few other independent bottlers. However, you just don't see too much grain whiskey being sold on its own. That's true. I guess the preference being for blended whiskey. Most grain goes into blended whiskey, including this distillery. It'd pretty much be 99.9% blended whiskey. Justin says, I've now experienced a few single grain whiskeys. The 40 to 48% ABV drams have been okay, but when the ABV goes big, like the upcoming release, it goes into the stratosphere. Why is single grain so much better to me, at least at higher ABV? Justin, awesome question. In a nutshell, alcohol carries flavor. So if you've tasted whiskey at 40 to 48%, I bet you'll find the same experience with society whiskeys that are malt whiskeys as well. You'll find the higher proof. Sometimes if they sit in that 50 to 58% bracket, or even 58 to 63% in some cases, you'll see that the spirit actually carries flavor through alcohol. So it's not just high proof for the sake of it. It's high proof and it's natural cask strength rather than watering it down. However, watering it down yourself can also let those flavors fly a little bit better, as we've seen before. So there's a bit of probably a longer answer to that I won't go into just yet. But basically, yeah, single grain tastes a lot better at higher proof because alcohol carries flavor, and there is a lot of flavor in grain, even if it's more subtle than malt whiskey. And I want to stress that if grain whiskey is like Tchaikovsky, and malt whiskey can sometimes be like Metallica. So I know that's a daft comparison, but it is true. You find that sort of balance is quite crucial. Let's go back over here. There's a distillery, like I say, lots of locals don't like it, but it produces a great whiskey. So column distillation is pretty simple enough. Then you turn on the heat, you pump in the feedstock, I should say, and wait for the alcohol to emerge. It really is. It's fairly straightforward. They take those vapors, heat them, let them cool, turn into a liquid, do it again. And then, however, it is a skill. It is an art form to using this as distillation. But I think this perception that grain whiskey is somewhat inferior only comes from the fact that grain whiskey is used as the backbone for so many blends. So blends you might know on the market, such as Johnny Walker, Chivas Regal, Ballantine's, Hague, whatever it is, the backbone of those blends comes from grain whiskey. And it's faster to produce, so therefore you can produce, and it's also cheaper by the ton for the actual raw materials. I should go actually a little bit into raw materials. Grain whiskey is predominantly corn or wheat. However, these days it's more and more wheat. And wheat per ton to distill is cheaper than malt whiskey by the ton, especially high-grade malt whiskey for distilling. The other thing I'll make mention as well, technically speaking, there's no such thing as a single grain. There is, but you do require a tiny bit of malted barley as the enzyme to actually start the distillation. So, and sorry, James Finnegan asks, is it a wash they put in or something else? No, it is a wash. It is. It's just a very controlled version of the wash that is continuously pumped in. And some distilleries might be able to, pump out 20 casks a day with their grain still, with their column still. And then other distilleries, like I said, Maker's Mark, I think is at 800 casks a day. Others, I don't know what Johnny Walkers are, but they're probably massively higher than that as well. So, but yeah, we do actually sometimes get to pick out casks. In this case, only 28 over the last nearly 40 years of the society. 28 casks have been bottled as single cask grain whiskies. Now, it says on here single grain Scotch whiskey. That's correct. So it would have been a single grain. It would have been probably wheat in this case. And it would have been starting to show itself now, that whiskey. 60.4%. This is not a shy whiskey by any means. 15 years old in the juicy oak and vanilla. Very, very worthy of the juicy oak and vanilla flavor profile in this case. So, hope that answers your question, James. Yes, it is. It's essentially a wash. In some cases, it's been things like, you can run a beer, wine, agave, sugarcane. So yeah, anything, you can put a few things through that. Let me just grab some of these next photos to show you here. Now, if you were a subscriber of our YouTube channel, you would have seen me already talk about a grain still, a column still with Craig Johnson over at Lark Distillery. Great little walkthrough of Lark, of how it looks today, what's going on over at that distillery over in Tassie. Go have a look at what they're doing. I keep pointing in the wrong direction, but there it is. There's the video. Craig, big shout out to Craig for being a part of that. And you can see the very, very loud and very noisy, but quite small column still in Lark Distillery. So if you put that on a scale of what distilleries like this would sound and look and smell like, something else. Okay. And if you haven't already subscribed, look, there it is. There's the page. That's how you subscribe on YouTube. Go to our page, SMWS Australia. Hit the subscribe, hit the bell icon. We'd really appreciate it anyway, because we're putting all this great effort into content. Sorry, all the effort into great content to create some really interesting videos for you to watch, like this one. But this one's live, so that's okay. This is good fun anyway. Immediately, I'm getting that sort of, it does say flashes of petrichor, and I do get that. We've had a couple of mentions of petrichor in tasting notes lately, which have been good fun. Sweetness and spice, all things nice. Bit of confectionery, bit of sort of like, definitely a confection note, a white sugar note there. Not unusual for grain whiskey. Great question here. I can't see who's asked it, but I'm going to put it up on screen. What's the science in the flavor enzymes and mouthfeel for unmalted grain? Why does unmalted grain impart this fruity, sour, and cereal note as well as a creamier mouthfeel? Why it imparts those flavors is largely to do with the quality of that grain. But the cereal note, of course, one of the stipulations from the Scotch Whisky Association is that Scotch whiskey must not, carries all the usual rules about cask size and filling temperatures and all that kind of stuff. But one of the rules is that it must be representative of Scotch whiskey. So you can't really, you have to sort of maintain a sense of identity within the spirit that you're creating. And I think that's a good thing. And I think this is what you find in grain whiskey. It does carry a sense of identity. It carries a backbone of, it is the backbone of the blended industry. And this distillery is no different either, by the way. So there we go. I was just putting the little, make sure you subscribe thing. There is one of the early drawings of a UDV still over at now known as Diageo. That is one of the early drawings of how to the operation of the still. Don't ask me to try and explain that. I just don't have enough of an engineering brain to really go, well, that makes sense, and that goes there, and that pipe's definitely there for that reason. You can sort of get an idea of where things sit and why. You can sort of see plates there. You can see cooling there. You can see the feed off it. You can see almost looks like a cooling or purifier on the left there. So you've got a few aspects there which make up the grain distillation, and the plates which make it a very old school but very efficient way of making whiskey, I should say. Just going on to this is a little chart I created earlier today just for this video, but you can have a look at this now. I'll put this up in our group for us all to have a look at later. But here we go. This should really sort of sum it up. Now, I've chosen some very careful words here. Here's our 5 main categories of whiskey straight away. On the top, we have single malt and we have single grain. What I'm on right now is a single grain, this G10. On the left there, we've got single malt. Single malt, and this does not really sort of apply. I mean, I haven't used Scotch whiskey here. I've used single malt. So this is made at one distillery, only uses malted barley, and distilled at least twice in pot stills. So there's your three main aspects of what makes a single malt. It doesn't mean it's from one malting season, doesn't mean it's one type of barley. You can use multiple types of barley. It's made at one distillery. It uses only malted barley. It can be many types of malted barley, as I just said, and it has to be distilled at least twice in pot stills for it to be a single malt here. On the right, single grain, which is what we're enjoying tonight, made at one distillery. Again, single grain, a mixture of grains. It can be a mixture of grains. You can have, it can be called single grain and be a mixture of grains, just like single malt could be a mixture of malts. And distilled once in a continuous still. It says distilled once. It can be distilled more than once and still be a single grain, but it's worth mentioning. It goes through one continuous sort of run of that still, whether it's redistilled 3 or 4 times in that still. And then single malt, as you can see on the left there, contributes to blended malt. So that's a blend of 2 or more single malt whiskeys. They don't necessarily have to be from the same. They could be even from the same distillery, and that has happened before, where you've got a blended malt from one distillery. It's very uncommon. It's basically like 2 or 3 distilleries I can think of that have ever done that. Maybe more now, but basically, if you've got 2 very different distillation runs coming off a pot stills, or in the case of something like Loch Lomond, they can make their own blended malt. There's a good example. But single malt contributes to blended whiskey as well, as you can see in the middle there. And single grain goes into blended whiskey, which is a blend of at least one single grain and at least one single malt. Again, could come from the same distillery and has in the past and probably does now. Single grain then can be used in blended grain as well as a blend of 2 or more single grain whiskies. Again, can be from the same distillery, but would be not in that case. Someone asks here, single pot still whiskey, just to clarify, is a separate description to identify a single pot run and can be made with both malted and unmalted barley. Is this correct? Single pot still whiskey. Yes, it's a description to describe it. I think you got that right. That is correct. I'd have to double check. I don't want to get too bogged down in definitions, but I think you're correct on that one. I can't see who wrote that. Put your name in the comment. In fact, go to streamyard.com/Facebook to allow Facebook to let it see your name. Facebook already knows everything about you anyway, so it doesn't matter if StreamYard do as well, I guess. So that infographic, I hope, is quite helpful in understanding grain whiskey. I'm going to go back and have a quick nose of this one. Yeah, that's really opened up, even just in that sort of 20 minutes since I poured it. James, great to see you, mate. I hope you're well, mate. Been too long. Pudding is correct, though. There's definitely like a sort of a soft, sort of squishy pudding note in there. Oh, that's delightful. You know what? The first thing that strikes me about this, 60.4%. Yes, my eyes are watering a little bit as first dram of the day, but it's not hot. It's not like it doesn't burn because it has such integration. I think in this case, it spent 13 years in an ex-bourbon barrel and then a final cask, which was a second fill heavy toast hoggy. So a bit of toastedness, a bit of toasty notes in the middle there. That's lovely. It's starting to shine really nicely in the glass here now. A bit of strawberry jam, bit of custard and strawberry jam. I'll agree with that. Tiny bit of like spearmint gum, like spearmint extra gum. I'm still trying to get you in Queensland, by the way. I'm still trying to get to Queensland. Now that I can, I will. Dan Gregory and I are keen to get you in. James, I'm totally keen. And I'd love to do some events with you and work with you guys on something in Queensland. Please, let's reach out again. It's been too long. Andrew Cuff, for those just tuning in, G10.28 Pudding faceplant. We're talking about grain whiskey tonight, having a bit of a discussion about grain whiskey, taking your questions as we go. I should have put this up on the screen a while ago. There we go. And I'll show that as well. There we go. So I'm going to add a bit of water. I always like trying whiskey with and without water. So now I've been talking about this whiskey for a while. Add a nice dash of water there, and I'll see where we're up to on our magic slideshow here. There it is. I'll bring it up as well. Look at that. Double win. Pudding faceplant, G10.28. And my main take-home message really from talking about this whiskey is to not discount grain whiskey, as in don't think that it's in any way inferior to malt whiskey. It's just different. It's like saying, is whiskey, is Scotch whiskey more complex than Armagnac? Some might say so. Some might disagree. Some might say, what do you mean by complex? Others would say, who cares? Let's just enjoy it. My theory is that every spirit should be assessed on its merits within its category in some ways. In that comparing Australian whiskey, say, to Scotch whiskey, I think is redundant, completely silly, and doesn't make sense. Pardon me. And I think comparing things like, Scotch whiskey to Armagnac, comparing grain whiskey to Scotch whiskey, to malt whiskey, I should say, sorry, is also redundant. So, great question here. Do you find water imparts different effect on the enzymes of unmalted whiskey compared to malted? No, I don't. I don't know why I don't. I just know that generally speaking, ex-bourbon barrels, in this case, it's had 2 ex-bourbon barrels, one which was a standard ex-bourbon barrel, and one which was a toasted hogshead. I find that ex-bourbon whiskies, especially younger ones, and 15 years old it's got a fair bit of age on it, but it's also quite young for a grain still. A lot of grain whiskies are a fair bit older, and we have some really old grain whiskey coming through soon. I saw Dave Maxwell pop his head in a moment ago, said he's still looking for a G14.3. The name on that one was something like Light, Fine, and Sculpted, or something like that. That was a lovely whiskey, truly like sublime stuff. I can't remember how old it was, 30-something years of age. Maybe, late 20s or early 30-year-old something whiskey. But Dave, I'd say keep your eye out, keep your ear out for one, of course, but don't get too I always say there's always good whiskey coming up, and that's why, if it's a good plug to say, March Outturn is this Friday. No, but like there's a great grain whiskey in this Friday's Outturn. Don't get too caught up in having to catch, something that was, I know that was probably quite an important whiskey to you in your society journey, but don't get too caught up in them. Water definitely helps that one. Definitely. That's fantastic. Get it, like the water's like become like a vanilla bean ice cream. Again, not an uncommon tasting note. So I talked a little bit about this distillery. I showed a photo of it before. It's the Strathclyde Distillery in Glasgow, formed in 1927. Was formed to create gin. Went on to create the Long John brand of blended whiskey, which I've seen bottles in the wild of. Definitely some historical curios there. And today is owned by Pernod Ricard. So with that said, you could probably take a fairly wild guess on what some of those whiskeys that it goes into. So before I press on, I'm going to take a few more questions here. Thoughts on peated unmalted whiskey? Peated unmalted whiskey. I'm trying to think if I've had a peated unmalted whiskey lately or any time. Peated unmalted. So like peated grain. It doesn't really take often because it's going in unmalted. So we're in the malting process of smoking of peating the barley. When would that happen? I don't know if I have. What is Connemara a peated unmalted? I don't think it is. I think they use. I don't know enough about Connemara. I'm sorry. So anyone's going to pull me up on that, someone can. Peated unmalted whiskey. That's really going to play with my head now. Thank you so much. I have to look that up. I have to do some research. My question is, would it be possible? Sorry, I should have got to the next comment. Is it possible? I don't know. Probably. I mean, you could smoke, like do smoked rye. You could do like a smoked rye, and then you could distill that. And how much of the rye takes on the smoke is another question. Same for wheat. Same for corn. I've certainly tasted smoky bourbons before from column stills. So yes, they've smoked the corn. And you know, you can get all sorts of smoky whiskeys like mesquite and things like Colkegan's. There's all ways of doing that. There are ways of doing it. The ones I've tried, I haven't been overly impressed with, to be honest. Now that I'm recalling peated whiskeys I've had that haven't come from malt, I remember just thinking they're often quite a bit thin. They didn't have that sort of mouthfeel and balance that you usually enjoy. If I want a peaty, smoky kind of spirit that isn't malt whiskey, I'll just end up reaching for something like a mezcal, to be honest. And that's not very often. I own like one bottle of mezcal, and it's nice, but I'm not a mezcal fan. But that's okay. Yeah, we all okay. Sorry, there you go. Connemara is peated, malted. Sorry, Connemara is malted. There we go. Sorry, like I said, I don't know enough about that about Connemara as a distillery or as a brand or anything. Yeah, you could always smoke the distillate like they do with brimstone. Andrew Cuff, great comment, great call there. You could smoke the distillate. It's always funny. I mean, it's all those experiments into, you know, smoky water being just distilling with peated water, or they never work. And experiments into sometimes smoking the distillate. Yeah, you could smoke or you could or you know, it's like trying some of those whiskeys. Like I've tried some Speyside whiskeys that have then had extra maturation in like ex-Lafroig casks or ex-Ardbeg casks. You often see some of those kind of things happening. That's always interesting. Like, it's always interesting experiments. We've got a few of those at the Society we've done over the years, and we've got more coming, of course, always. Where we've had, in fact, it's always really exciting with the Society ones for me, because it's actually lineage of the cask that you can follow back in time. You can say, like, this whiskey was extra mature. This is a rum cask extra maturation that has had an extra, or a peated Speyside whiskey that had extra maturation in a 29 dot something, which is always fun. That's always like kind of like if you're lucky enough to try that 29 or have a bottle of it, you might be sort of like exploring that a bit better there. Now it's turning into like oozy sort of caramel slice, like a real sort of like very, very thick caramel slice on the nose with that water. Really has changed it now. I know what they mean by pudding. The pudding faceplant is a very good comment. So look, I'll leave you with this just before I go. If you think that grain whiskey is somewhat inferior to malt whiskey, you're missing out. I'll just finish with that sort of that final statement in a way. If you think that, you know, malt whiskey is more craft than grain whiskey, again, you're missing out. The bigger picture is that all whiskey has its merits and its strengths in different areas. And if you can taste something like this that has oozy caramel bun and rich vanilla ice cream notes and confectionery and even slight bit of petrichor, as I said before, that slight after rain smell, you get some great aromas, some great storytelling here, and just a really enjoyable whiskey. And by the way, I've also said in an article once in Unfiltered magazine for the UK, I said that if you were introducing someone to whiskey and they weren't a spirits drinker at all, you might want to start them on something like a grain. Get a sense for that taste of grain, and then move to malt whiskey from there. It's like starting with a blended whiskey. So, I mean, honestly, if brands like, as I said before, if brands like your Pappy Van Winkles and your Johnny Walker Blues of the world, they're great whiskeys, and if they can rely on continuous column distillation to create most, if not all, of some of their products, then why not? James, that means it'll work for the next time I'm live, which is almost every night. In fact, this week it is every night, which is why I've got this up on screen now, so you can see what's coming up next. Here we go. Here is Dave Broom. This is tomorrow night. How exciting is this? This is tomorrow night, Whiskey Roundtable. I'm one of the members of Whiskey Roundtable. Myself, Scott Fitzsimons, Alex Darlenberg, and Andy Scott Milne. We are going live tomorrow with Dave Broom. I think that's rather cool. Dave's a bit of a legend, absolute legend of the whiskey industry. Great presenter, great author, great writer, journalist. Like he's one of those guys that has, and he's a master of the quake. So he's not just a keeper of the quake; he's a master of the quake, which is one of the highest honors, if not the highest honor you can attain in Scotch whiskey, which is very cool. So that's what you get to look forward to tomorrow night. Not just me talking, but we're having a live stream chat with Dave Broom, the legend himself. That's what we like to do at the Society. That's what we like to do at Roundtable as well, is have a chat with these people, have these great content for members, and get to enjoy a few whiskeys along the way. Outturn is this Friday, March Outturn. The year's going so fast. March Outturn, all about game changes, up your whiskey game in March. And we've got, I think it's 17 or 18 different casks. But it's also just a great sort of read through of the Society's history as well in this little Outturn. You can read the printed copy, but if you're a bit more environmentally friendly than I am, you might like to read it just online, which is on our website now, if you're a member, of course. And James, yes, we'll be asking Dave some Japanese whiskey questions tomorrow. We've already got a few lined up here. So jump on the comment stream, James, tomorrow at 7:30. That's 7:30 Sydney time. I think Brisbane time's the same. I can't remember. It's always Adelaide's the one that's a little bit out. Jump on the stream with us tomorrow, James, and ask Dave those questions. Put them in the comment stream, and we'll throw them in. It's probably going to be quite a busy session tomorrow with Dave, so see how we go. But really looking forward to it. Thanks again to all of you for tuning in and being a part of this. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you all. See you all soon. Enjoy grain whiskey. Cheers.